Many assume that dating scams only take place online, a scenario where they create an emotional connection over a period of time and eventually start asking for money. Today we talk with someone who was deceived in person and how to see the warning signs in real life. Today's guest is Abby Ellin. Abby has been a freelance writer for 20 years. She has mostly written for the New York Times, but has been published in countless other publications, including Time, Spy, and the London Daily Telegraph. Abby's latest book, Duped, Double Lives, False Identities, and the Con Man I Almost Married, was published in 2019 and is the topic of today's discussion. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Prey Podcast. Abby, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey Podcast today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So a while back, you wrote a book called Duped, Double Lives, False Identities, and the Con Man I Almost Married. One of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast is that your story is different than a number of the stories that I've heard. Most of the stories that I've heard or been tangential to are online scams where the person's in another country, it's a totally made up identity, it's a fake picture, it's stock photos. Everything is planned and organized in advance by a group of con men. But your experience was different than that. A flesh and blood in-person experience.
Yep.
So can you give us a little background of what happened and how it all played out?
Yes, I can. Very briefly, I was engaged to a guy who turned out to be a pathological liar and went to jail. That's the quick story. I thought something was off with him. I left him within a year, but a year and a half later, I got a phone call from Special Agent Dan Ryan with NCIS. And he said, there's a doctor in the military who's been writing prescriptions for drugs, and you're one of the people whose names is there. And do you have a prescription for narcotics? And I said, no, I do not. But I know this guy. And turns out he was using all of these people's names to get drugs, Vicodin and other things that were not illegal, but forging names, and that is illegal. And so I threw a little statement against him, and he ended up going to jail for 2 years. And a lot of people he went against him. It wasn't just me. And then I kicked into journalist mode, and I began interviewing people in his life. I talked to his ex-wife and his ex-wife and the woman he was engaged to when he was engaged to me. And I talked to people he worked with at the Pentagon, and so I was fascinated. My book is a memoir to some degree, but it's also an investigation into lying and deception, why we lie, why we trust, why we believe, who we deceive the most, which is ourselves. So that's really what I was looking at. And I was trying to get at that through stories. So
in this process, was there, when you were getting to know him, were there a bunch of red flags? Like on the online stuff, I would normally tell people, well, the person says, hey, I'm going to fly out to meet you, and they don't show up, or there's always a reason why they can't be there in person. But if this guy was there in person.
Exactly. There were little red flags. They were like pinkish flags, they weren't quite red. They were mauve. I mean, things were weird. Like he had been living in Jacksonville, Florida, and we were going to move in together. We did. We moved into the Watergate, which is hilarious, in DC, which is like ground zero for deception. And I wanted to go with him to pick up his stuff in Jacksonville. And he said, don't worry about it. You don't need to come. I'm too old. I'm gonna send some interns to do that for me. He was a doctor in the Navy for real. And he worked at the Pentagon. He was working on a project for real. And he did live in Jacksonville. And, that was all true. But I later found out, the reason he didn't want to go, I don't even know if he ever sent anything. I don't think he did. From his home in Jacksonville, because he had been living with another woman. And that was the woman where basically he proposed to her. And then 2 months later, he said to her, I'm going on a secret mission. I'll call you when I'm back. And the secret mission was Operation Abby. It was me. And so she had no idea what happened to him. So anyway, so that was a red flag. To me, it was like a little weird. Why didn't he want us to go down and pick up, I would help him pack up his belongings. That was weird, but
still really plausible that it's
totally.
not unreasonable. Yeah.
Totally. Exactly. It's not unreasonable. He was always, I'll call you. He would go off. He'd say, I'm going to Iraq or Afghanistan, and I'll call you when, there's a secure line. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? And he'd tell me he was on the secret. He also went on all these secret missions. I mean, nothing was verifiable. And that drove me crazy, especially as a journalist. It drove me nuts. But nothing was verifiable. You can't call the CIA and say, yo, does this guy work there? It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
So there were red flags, but I was trying to talk myself sort of out of them. And they also, as you say, they were plausible.
So sometimes you see someone and I guess trying to ask is, were you a specific, intended, thought out in advance target of this guy? Or was this just kind of the way he lived his life, just going from person to person, story to story?
It's a good question. I met him when I interviewed him for an article for a newspaper, and he was a doctor. And it was about detox diets and whether they had any merit. And so we had a nice conversation. Story didn't run for another year. Then I called him to fact check. And he told me he had been in private practice in California, in Beverly Hills. And then he left to go a year later. He said, I'm in Jacksonville in the Navy. And he told me he was opening up a hospital for kids with cancer in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I said, that's a story. Keep me posted. And so he did every so often. So in answer to your question, maybe he knew that I was interested in what he was doing. And he thought, so she's interested in that. Maybe when he found out that I wasn't seeing anybody, he Googled me. Maybe he liked the way I looked. Did he specifically target me? I don't know. I don't know that, but I know when he was with me, he was also reaching out to a woman he had been with 30 years earlier. So, that is exactly what he did. Again, just like you said, he went from one woman a million years ago. He had a wife. They were trying to have a baby as far as she knew. And in the meantime, he met another woman and left the first wife for the next woman. They had 2 kids. Then they split up, and then he met another woman, proposed to her. Then he met me. And so this is what he did. It was his pattern.
So it's a little bit different. I think when we see kind of the con men in the movies, maybe we think of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, where they're, trying to find the 80-year-old woman with $10 million and see if they can, go from her to the next one and accumulate massive wealth. But that doesn't sound like.
No, but what he was, it's a love con, right? And I don't, in the book, I don't only have those kind of stories at all, because I wasn't interested in just that. It was a love con, but it was also, he deceived the people he worked with at the office. He stole their information. He stole their identities to get drugs for himself. So that's fraud. That's a con. It's a little different. Yes, it is different for some nameless person. And I think one of the reasons the nameless frauds don't hurt as much is because it doesn't feel as personal as when you know somebody and they're deceiving you. You establish a relationship with someone, and friend, colleague, whatever, girlfriend, boyfriend, spouse, and the betrayal is just enormous, right? Yeah. If somebody you don't know in Nigeria targets you, whatever, it's not personal, right? Not personal.
Yeah, this is the flesh and blood.
The flesh and blood.
They're going out to a dinner together, guy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when I finally left him, and I was very suspicious though. You asked the red flag. I was suspicious. I couldn't confirm anything, but I couldn't stop being a journalist. I was only with him for a year, and I finally left him when we went out to dinner with my parents, and he raved about the Brussels sprouts. He said they were the greatest Brussels sprouts ever cooked in America. And when we got out of the restaurant, he said, God, that was the worst meal I ever had. And I said, why did you lie? Well, I was trying to make them feel good. I said, they didn't care. And I thought to myself, if he could lie so convincingly about something so stupid, then he could lie about anything. And that was when I was done, because that was verifiable.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the things that maybe for him it just happened to be coincidental, but you do see a lot in the online scams. They're in the military. That's why they can't be reached. Those are the reasons why they can't be reached. But like for him, he could be reached, and that wasn't.
He could be reached, but sometimes he wouldn't, or he wasn't able to be reached because he was maybe doing other things with other women. I mean, I don't know. That's a really good question. What the hell was he doing when, there were times once he was supposed to meet me, he would cancel plans at last minute, and he would tell me it's because, he had to go, and everything miraculously, mysteriously, everything that he was doing always seemed to happen when I was out of town or when no one was there to watch it. So he was flying from Washington to New York on the shuttle, and Hillary Clinton was there and wanted an audience with him. Or another time he saved the life of somebody in a metro in DC. And I was like, well, where's the footage? No, there was no camera. There would have been cameras, you know what I mean? So everything always happened when I wasn't around. And I don't even remember what your question was.
Well, that's one of those things that was, we were talking about when the guy's the Navy SEAL and he's on secret missions and things like that. That's the normal MO of a lot of these international scammers.
No, and I think that's what this guy did. What I know about the military thing, I mean, it's stolen valor and it's illegal. And what's so interesting to me is that anytime I see or I hear about somebody, a con man, whether it's in a romantic relationship or even if it's like a GoFundMe, invariably they will have been or claim to have been in the military, which I find is fascinating. And it makes sense because we aren't going to question somebody who's a war hero. You don't question them.
Yeah, it speaks to our desire to be patriotic, our desire for authority figures and someone to be proud about and like, he's a good guy.
And the trust we place in authority figures, the trust we place, this is not only was he in the military, so he would wear his military uniform when we went out, all the time. I mean, his kid, when we went to like some show at his kid's school in Los Angeles, he would wear his military outfit. The kid wanted him to. He was proud of his dad, but he was also a doctor. So you don't think people in those positions of power are going to be bad eggs. And oftentimes they are, and precisely because they can be.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like it baffles me that he was also stealing from people at work. And it's almost like he had I kind of wonder, was there a pathological need for this guy to be constantly doing this stuff? I think,
I'm going to throw the addiction piece aside because it's really, I wrestle with this because if he grew up in the inner city and he was an addict and he was selling drugs or he was doing whatever, I would be much more compassionate for him because he didn't have chances, right? He might not have had chances. He grew up, in a society where there's not a lot of ways or haven't been a lot of ways to get out of that. This guy was a white guy who went to Ivy League schools. He did all those things and he was got into trouble. I don't, but he was a pathological liar. I don't think that his drug problem, I think he could have been selling drugs. They never caught him for that, but they caught him for using because he was using a ton, but he got so many drugs that I think he was also selling them. That's what I think. But he just, I don't know if I think he's a narcissist. I think he may be sociopathic. Profoundly insecure. He wanted people to like him and he wanted to feel big. And in his case, he wasn't a surgeon. He always wanted to be a brain surgeon and he wasn't.
So is that what you referred to back earlier when you wanted to find out why we trust and why we lie? Was that just his need to be loved and appreciated or respected?
Yeah, I think it needs to be loved and appreciated, but it's also, these people, and if they are psychopath, sociopath, those words are used interchangeably a lot, but they thrive on manipulating people and getting things over on people, right? So I have all the information. I'm basically playing chess with people's lives. They get off on that, So I think that was part of it. I think, he liked getting something over on people who were smart.
So it's almost like they're, whether it's him or other people in general, it's not, like if we're thinking of the romance scammer online, their goal is, how can I get as much money as I can from this person?
Right.
And the manipulation is kind of secondary to that. It sounds like almost with some in-person con men, it's almost the manipulation is the goal.
Yes and no. He once said to me something to the effect of, it's funny. Before I went off with him, before I asked somebody, I asked a lawyer about debt. I said, if this guy has credit card debt and I marry him, will I incur that debt? I asked a lawyer this. So on some level, I was very suspicious. And the lawyer said, no, you won't incur the debt that came into the marriage, but anything he gets while you're together is yours. And so I was wondering about that. I also wondered if he could get his hands on my apartment in New York City. And that's in my name, so he couldn't. But so to answer your question, he once said to me something like, do your parents have money or something like that? Are you going to inherit something? So there was a question there, but I was so careful. I was very cognizant of that. And I lived in the apartment. We lived in the Watergate. He covered that. I wasn't paying for that. I was at school at the time at Johns Hopkins. So I didn't lose any money. I did not lose money. So I must have been a failed scam because if he wanted money, otherwise it was just getting one over on me and people with his people at work, the people he worked with at the Pentagon, he got their names. He got it. He was able to get drugs from them.
Yeah, assume their identities and
yeah.
So you also talked about why do we trust? What are those things that they're manipulating for the benefit of trust?
We have to trust. We trust every single day. The society will not function without trust. We have to, and we trust people. If you think about it, that we know nothing about. So you trust that the pilot's really a pilot. You trust that the surgeon's really a surgeon. You trust that that your dentist knows how to fill a cavity. I mean, we trust that the car behind us is going to stop at the stop sign, and not back. I mean, so society will not function without trust, and that is why it is our default mode, and that's why we trust. We are programmed to trust. And then I looked at animals and how deception works in the animal kingdom, and there's a lot of deception in it because it's survival. They have to obfuscate or else they get eaten. So we have to trust, yet to some degree we have to deceive. So it's very complicated with people.
So is the balance in that, do you think, your gut saying that we really need to kind of trust that instinctual gut sense when we think something's just not right here, something just is off?
100%. I am such a fan of the gut. I can't even tell you. I invariably, anytime I have a spidey sense, I'm right about something. Anytime I think something is off, whether it's just somebody being not even nice, whether it's somebody having some weird, whatever agenda, I don't know, but it's always right. It's really weird. And this guy, on the one hand, the thing about him, he was really super charming. He was charming and seemed to adore me, and it moved very fast. But, I was 42, he was 58. So we weren't kids. It was like speed. It was speedy, the relationship. We were engaged within 6 months, but my parents were married after 3 months, and they're 50 something years, they're still together. So to me, that didn't seem odd.
Yeah.
It's, you hear that from people when I know, so, yeah.
Yeah, I know I had talked to another previous guest, and what he talked about is that when it comes to our gut, like so much of society nowadays teaches us not to trust our gut, to not listen to our gut. It's like, oh, no, you need to trust what you can see in front of you, trust what you read, trust what you're being too cynical, that there's all this, feedback against us telling us not to trust our gut, yet we have our life of experiences and telling us you need to listen to me.
This is something I talk about and I think about a lot because I wrestle with it in my own life. I met a woman recently, and she was just starting to see some guy, and he told her that he had been in the military and blah blah blah, and things were moving very quickly. And she said, "I know you wrote this book. What do you think?" And I said, "Listen, what I said to you, every time I hear about some scam, the guy always says he's in the military." And there was some question. He was maybe he was living with his mother, but she hadn't been to his house. And I thought, this doesn't sound right. Like, this could be a girlfriend or a wife. Who knows? Anyway, it turns out that I was wrong. And they're still going strong. And, that was my agenda. That was my baggage. That was what I brought to it, was the takeaway from that. So this is something that I'm trying to wrestle with myself, is how do you be vigilant and not overly cynical?
Yeah. Our gut's going to tell us stuff based on our own experiences. So you had a bad experience with someone who was in the military. So our gut now tells us, or your gut now tells you, be a little cautious of the military aspect.
No. But it's not just that. I mean, I've done research on it. It's not just one experience. I've admired in it. But then, that's confirmation bias. You see what you see, right? You see what you believe. So I'm seeing a lot of people who lie, who deceive. So I'm mired in these stories. Would it be nice, maybe if I were, reading Danielle Steele every day, novels and, like happy experiences, maybe that would be the way I view the world. I don't know. But I'm also a journalist, so I'm cynical anyway.
And you're not the only person who's mentioned. I mean, obviously, I was talking earlier about the military being authoritative, and we're drawn to them, whether it's the patriotism, the authority, just there's an exoticness about it. They're overseas.
And they're noble. Well, they're noble.
And they're noble. Yes.
Boy Scouts. This guy, would say to me, I don't care about making money. He left. I would be like, why did you leave your big practice in Beverly Hills? Which I later found out because he was very erratic and maybe had a drug problem. But I said to him, why did you leave he said, because I wanted to do something for my country. And I couldn't sit by while harm was, while my children were in danger. And I was like, what are you talking about? What? But I thought, okay, he's noble. He wants to serve his country,
And it's funny because when you're talking about the military, had another guest who talked about, she said, like, if you're ever on a dating app and the person's in their military uniform on the dating app, they're fake.
Totally.
She says, like, I've talked to tons and tons of military guys over the years, and not a single military guy would ever use his dress, either his fatigues or his dress uniform in a dating profile. That's just not what they do.
They don't do it. No. What are you going to do that for? They don't do that. Anytime. I get these messages all the time on Facebook, too, from people. And they're widowed. They're always widowed. And I'm like, and we have no mutual friends, these friend requests. And I'm like, it's fake. It's a scam. I don't know what they want, but it's yeah.
Yep. And that's also one of those warning signs. Is they're widowed. They have kids. They're overseas. But again, to me, that's probably the overseas scammer who's just looking for money. And there's just something more, like you said, there's just something more personal when they're there.
When they're there. Well, what's so interesting is what you said. And it was something I wondered. I was like, if you're going to dupe somebody, you dupe an heiress. You dupe somebody who's like going to inherit a fortune from Johnson & Johnson. You don't dupe, or try to dupe a freelance journalist in New York City. It's like stupid. What is the goal? Right. What is the goal? What is the takeaway? And there are some people who just enjoy, messing with people's lives. But I think they really have, personality disorders.
Yeah. Your story, to me, that's what it speaks to is, I have no clinical background, no education in this area, but it sounds to me like someone who's just enjoys being manipulative.
Yeah. Whereas the scammers online, who are they? I mean, what is their goal? Are they bad eggs? Are they impoverished in, some poor African country? I mean, what is it who are they? What are they trying to get?
Yeah.
And what is the goal? And I mean, there have been stories written. I haven't written them, but there are stories written about people who have found their online scammer. It's interesting.
Yeah, they're few and far between when they find the people, and occasionally the scammer, after some period of time, will sometimes fess up and say, "Hey, guess what? Now that I've got everything that I can get out of you, I just want to let you know that I'm not really who I claim to be." Maybe they're feeling guilty. Maybe
I called an online scammer once. I got one of those, somebody died and left you all this money, kind of old, which I haven't gotten in a while. I don't know if those still exist. So I called the guy, and he was he in Nigeria? Maybe. I mean, I knew it was a scam, and he said, let me call you back. And he wanted some information from me. And that was it. I didn't want to talk to him again, or I didn't pick up the phone again when he called, because I knew it was obviously he wanted money, but it's hard for me to imagine why anybody would fall for that. And yet, I think fewer people are falling for that particular scam now because they're well aware. It's the online romance scams that are that are really scary.
And they've gotten so much more sophisticated. There's, it used to just be, I used to give people the advice, just video chat with them. And because if they're not who they claim to be, they'll always have some excuse of why they won't video chat with you.
Always.
But they've gotten around that now. I was talking with someone who he was a well-known CEO, and there was plenty of video footage of him in interviews. And so what they would do is when he would supposedly get onto video chat, they would play the video, but no audio. And then they'd start and stop the video and, my internet connection is bad.
Wow.
Or you're getting the technology these days to do deep fakes and create fake videos in real time. It's like, I can't give people that advice anymore. It still should be a warning sign if they won't, FaceTime you or chat with you. But
look, it boils down to this. If somebody can't meet you, and the minute they start asking for money, that's it. That's the end of the conversation. That's the end of the conversation. You don't send money to someone whom you do not know, whom you do not have a personal relationship with in person over, many months, many years, like a real relationship.
Yeah.
It's that basic.
But to me, it's scary when the con man's there in person, because so much of that well-known advice suddenly goes out the window because they're physically there. You met his son.
Yes, I know that. But again, I didn't give him money.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, it depends what we're talking about. If we're talking, because it's not, you can't prosecute somebody for lying. I mean, stolen valor when they're lying about being in the military, yes, and getting certain medals, that can be prosecuted. There's a line between that and what's free speech. But somebody just lies and they tell me, if they tell me they're Brad Pitt, chances are I will know they are not. But if they tell me something else and I believe it, and I don't lose any money or I don't lose anything else other than, my own sense of self, it's not a crime. So it's really hard to get into that. And that depends how much of your own self you give to someone else, right? If you think about how much you can withstand. So, yes, when someone wants money from you, you don't give it to them. And then I have people writing to me all the time and they say, well, I lived with somebody for 10 years, for 15 years, and we have joint accounts, and then they just absconded. And that's like, yeah, that's a different situation.
Yeah. So we were talking about detection of deception. We talked about gut. Are there other things that we can tell when people are being deceitful in those in-person interactions?
You need to know what the baseline of there isn't really if you look up, it means one thing. If you look down, it means something else. If you scratch your nose, it's not like that. Because I took a class, and I have a chapter on this. I took a class from a bunch of CIA guys. And, you need to know what someone's baseline is. And so do they always scratch their nose, or do they only shift uncomfortably when they're talking about certain things? And that's how you can tell. But because I remember looking at this guy, and he looked at me straight on when we were talking. He didn't blink. He seemed to tell me exactly what I wanted to hear, looking right at me. And I was like, well, he's not shifting. He's not doing anything. It doesn't matter. So that you have to learn someone's behavior. But I personally want hard evidence. To me, it's like, if you can't come into my house for whatever reason, that's a sign. Like, you need to listen and watch and be just vigilant about everything. Polygraphs are interesting because they don't work. People think they're lie detectors. They don't detect lies. They detect shifts in your autonomic responses, right? Which are the involuntary responses. So whether your heart goes up, or your heart rate goes up, whether you are stressed, whether you're anxiety, that's, so you could pass a polygraph test by just, if you believe your lies.
That's the scary thing to me, is when you have someone who believes their own lies,
right,
is the scary thing.
And there's something even better than that, which is even scarier. Your brain, there has been research done that shows the more you lie, the more your brain adapts to the lie so that you don't even know you're lying.
Oh.
So chew on that. Yeah. But anyway, there's a guy I wrote about. His name is Doug Williams, and he was teaching people how to pass polygraphs. If you clench your behind together, your butt cheeks, and there are ways of just calming yourself down so you can pass. So it's a matter of, so you could pass a polygraph test, and it doesn't measure lies. So for me, it's hard evidence is the way, and papers and documents and behaviors and who you meet and all of that.
So, with this guy, did you meet, other than his son, did you meet much family, friends?
I met this was part of the problem. I met some friends, and I met his 80-something aunt, and I met his brother and sister-in-law and their kids. Yeah. And they all believed he was a military hero. In fact, there was one point where I called up the brother. I said, I don't know how to talk to him. He's always mad at me because he feels like I interrogate him because I don't trust him. He said, Abby, he's very busy. He's very important. You got to lay off. Which was, that wasn't, he was important in his head. He was tilting it, these fictional windmills.
So it wasn't like he was just lying to you and not to his family. He was lying to everybody.
Oh, no, his son would call up. So he would tell me and his son that, there were Secret Service guys watching outside, watching us from afar. And I'd be like, yeah, okay, I don't see anybody. He said, no, Abby, the operative word is secret. That's why you don't see them. They're Secret Service. I said, okay, well, tell them to pick me up and give me a ride next time, Anyway, one night his son called up, who lived with his mother in Los Angeles, and said, hey, there's a black car outside. Is that one of your guys? I remember hearing that, and I thought, okay, maybe this is real. Like, why would you lie to your child? He told me and everyone else that he met his wife, his ex-wife, when he rescued her when she was held hostage in Iran. Well, she was never in Iran.
Oh,
they
wow.
met at school. Yeah, but that was a story his son also knew. So and I knew that his son knew that because his son would say, yeah, I want to be just like my dad. I want to be like a war hero. And that's what his son thought. Eventually, years later, his son thought that his father was responsible for the raid on bin Laden.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he wasn't, it was very complicated.
Yeah, it sounds like the lies just kind of, in his life, just seemed to escalate over time. That I've got to tell something bigger and bolder and grander to, gosh, that sure seems like an addiction. That sure, it seems to be from a distance like addictive behavior. You've got to have more, stronger, more frequent.
Well, and people say, that addicts, and I know this from the addicts that that I know, they lie often. They'll do whatever it takes to get their drugs, But I think this guy just lied by default. He, as you say, it was just sort of his second nature. He was always, from wanting people to like him so much that he would lie about Brussels sprouts, Nobody cared. My parents didn't cook them. Nobody cared. So
that's interesting that was something that you picked up on in the moment.
But it was tangible. He would go over every time we would go out with my friends. He would meet friends, and he would pay for everything. He was always paying for everything. It's not like he had that much money. And, he just lying was his way out. And he would always say to every single one, what a treat this is, meeting you. And, like every single one was a treat. I don't think so. But eventually I was staying in the Watergate, and he said to me, the military needs the apartment back. So we both have to move out. This was after we broke up. I was staying in the Watergate because I lived in New York. I was in Washington for school. I didn't have a place there. So anyway, so he sent everything back to my house in New York, and I ended up just commuting. And a few months later, I drove by the Watergate and the light was on. And I said to him, "Oh, are you back in there, or did they find someone else living there from the Navy?" Because he told me the Navy had been paying for the apartment. And he said, "No, it was a comedy of errors." He said, "I moved everything out and then I had to move everything in again." And I said, "Oh, okay." And that did not suffice. I was like in, Nancy Drew mode. I was like, I got to see what's going on here. So I called him up. I said, "I think I left my cookbooks there and a few things. So I want to come and get them." So he said, "Okay." So we made a date. I went to the apartment, and I tell you, everything was exactly as it was when I left. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. Like down to the sliver of soap in the soap dish. And I looked at him and I said, "You never left." And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, "Yes, I did." And I just thought, "You're nuts." I mean, that was it. And I think he believed it. But I mean, it was so that he could not tell the truth. He just couldn't.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you were able to get out of that situation with only the personal scars as opposed to much more which could have happened.
It could have happened. I worried about that a little bit, but no, he wasn't. He hadn't been a Navy SEAL. He wasn't working with the CIA. He was just some little nerdy guy.
So, if people want to find your book, where can they find it?
They can find it on their local website, on their local Amazon, on their local Barnes & Noble, on IndieBound. They can go to a bookstore. There are all these radical ways of finding books.
No.
Yes. So it's Abby, and my website is abbyellin.com, ABBYELLIN. And the book is Duped, Double Lives, False Identities, and the Con Man I Almost Married.
Nice. So are you still like looking for stories and going into this realm deeper?
I'm always looking for stories. Yeah. I love good stories. And I have a podcast that's going to come out in the fall. That's like a six episode series. It's kind of like Dirty John, but it's about my story. So I'm always interested in hearing other people's.
We'll definitely we'll direct people your way when we come across them, and definitely let us know when your podcast is live, and we'll make sure to link it in the show notes.
Thank you so much.
Abby, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Prey podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please leave a review at easyprey.com/review. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Abby Ellin can be found at easyprey.com/56.